Hi, Woodchip Gardener. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Q&A live on White Baby Gardening and Worm Farm. So today we're going to be looking at balcony and small space gardening. So oftentimes we hear people say that they do not have enough space that they can grow a garden, or they live in an apartment. So what can you do if you only have a balcony, or if you only have a small space, or if you don't have any of these and you'd like to grow a garden? Well, for starters, oh, hi, Hoyty Robinson. How are you? It's been a while. I hope you're keeping well. Yeah, so what can you do? Well, if you don't have a backyard to grow in, and you might not have a balcony or a small space that you can grow in, then you may consider growing things like small leafy green vegetables or herbs. These you can grow on your windowsill, but then that also depends on the depth of your windowsill, because some windowsills are pretty deep, some are non-existent or small. So depending on the depth of your windowsill, then you may be able to grow on your windowsill. If the property is yours and you don't have a deep windowsill to hold small pots, then you may choose to create a support that you can hang baskets on and grow in those hanging baskets. So that is one option. If you have your window north facing, of course, then that would not work, because plants will get in the most sunlight if your window is south facing. If it is east or west facing, then the plants will get some amount of sunlight, and depending on the type of plant, they may be able to survive, depending also on the climatic condition in the region that you live. So that's one thing to consider. Now, if you have, say you have a windowsill and you have a balcony, then the good thing is that for small plants, your herbs and your leafy green vegetables that are small, these you can grow on your windowsill, and then reserve the balcony for larger plants like your tomatoes and your peppers. Now, one thing that you want to keep in mind when you have restricted place or space for growing is to grow vertically. So we're going to be looking at some of the ways that you can actually grow your plants vertically, because there are several ways. I may not have covered all of them. So when you're growing on your balcony, you have to consider, of course, those who live below you. For example, you have to think about the water that you're going to be using for your plants. Are you going to have catchment trees below them so that no water drip down to the balcony of your neighbors below? Or what if you are filling your containers with soil? Are there steps that you can take to ensure that the soil particles do not fall below and cause a mess on your neighbors below you? Let's see. Artie says, I'm experimenting with ingrown worm containers made of coffee containers. Worms are loving them, but it looks like they stay really moist. Is that fine? Of course, that works. There are many large scale worm farmers who actually raise their worms in the ground. So they will create burrows or trenches for the worms, and that's where the worms stay permanently. Of course, it will be okay as long as, of course, you don't have temperatures that are below the temperatures that worms can survive in. So if your temperatures are going to be going below 10 degrees Celsius, then chances are that will not work. Of course, if it is Canadian night crawlers, then they don't mind the cold temperatures. They can go deep, but you're having them in containers and not in trenches. So they should still be okay. You just have to make sure that you keep them warm enough. Let's see. Morgan is asking if I've had any snow. Yes, I've had snow. It's white outside. And when was that? Sometime last week we had really warm weather, so it started to melt. Didn't fully go away. Started to melt, but then over the weekend, well, Thursday, we got a really nice, heavy, I shouldn't say nice because there's nothing nice about that, but we got a lot of snow, so everything is white again. And I'm disappointed about that. I don't know why I'm disappointed because I mean, this is Saskatchewan after all. You have to expect snow once it reaches September, but I'm still disappointed. Yeah, I know I'm a bit silly, but that's okay. Yeah, so let's see what where were we? Yes, so I was saying you are to consider your neighbors below you whenever you are considering growing on your balcony, because if not, then you can have soil and water dripping down on them, and that is not really kind to your neighbor. So you can either create a barrier for the base of your balcony, something, or you use catchment trees, or if you're putting soil into your containers, then you can spread something out to ensure that there is no soil falling below. Okay, so when you are planning to grow on a balcony or even in a small space, one of the things that you have to consider is for your handrail, you can use planters. These work pretty well. Now your handrail come in different sizes and depending on the type of material that it is made for. So some handrail will be 4 inches wide, which is not really four, but 3.5 inches wide. Some handrail will be 6 inches wide, which is literally 5.5 inches and not 6 inches wide. So you can either purchase planters to hang on these or you can make your own. Some handrail might be smaller than that, and there might be hanging basket that is made for those type of handrail as well. Now, if you're a handy person, then you can make your own handrail planter. And one of the good thing about this is that you get to choose the design of the planter that you want, and you get to determine the size of the planter that you want. Of course, you have to keep in mind the final weight of the planter with the plant in it, making sure that it is secured properly because you don't want to have an accident where your planter falls off the balcony and then harm someone. So those things you have to keep in mind. You, if you're building your own planter, you can choose whether you want to make it double-sided, where you can plant on both sides of the handrail, meaning that one of the planter will be hanging over the handrail and you can utilize that open space. So this is one of the things that you can keep in mind. Now, there are several options for vertical gardening. So you can choose to create your own vertical garden planter, or you can choose to buy. There are many options available on the market at the moment. But for me, I personally like the idea of making my own. Of course, not everyone has that opportunity to make their own, but with you making your own, then you have a lot more options available to you. So palette is one thing that you can use to create your vertical garden. So you can use pallets, or you can use smaller, you can use pallets, or you can make your own pallets, and these will be designed different from the regular shape pallets. One of the good thing when using pallets is that you can grow a lot of different things, different plants in it. So you can grow herbs in it, different size herbs, and you can grow small vegetables in it. So you're using a small amount of space, but you have a lot of plants in that little space. Now you may choose to use a trellis or a lattice, but you want to make sure that the lattice that you're using, and when I say trellis, I'm talking about a wooden trellis. You want to make sure that it is strongly built, and it must be strong enough to support the size containers that you want to hang on it. So when you're making the trellis, if you're making one, then you need to consider what size pots you're going to be having on it, what size the plants that you're going to be putting in there is going to be, and average weight that it is going to be, so that you can build it strong enough. If you're purchasing a wooden trellis, then you also need to keep this information in mind, because the size that you want may not be available. So you have to take what is available. When that is the case, the containers that you get will have to be one that match the weight limit of that trellis that you will get. Now, like I said, you want to make sure that the trellis can bear the weight of the containers with the plant. Now, there are also stackable pots that are available that you can use for your vertical garden, and these usually comes with different sizes. So you'd stack the bigger ones at the bottom and the smaller one to the top. So these work pretty well when you are doing vertical gardening. You can also build shelving for your plants, or purchase shelving for your plants if you're going to be growing vertically, whether it is on a balcony or it is in a small space outdoors. Right. So one of the good thing with building your own trellis, not trellis, but shelving, is that you can keep in mind what it is that you want to be growing and the size of them, and then your shelving can be built accordingly. So if you're building a tier shelving system, you want to ensure that the lower section can facilitate the larger plants, and as you go higher, then you want to put the smaller plants to the top. Now, when you are growing vertically, you want to make sure that the plants are placed where they will maximize the sunlight that is available. So, like I mentioned before, if your balcony or your small space is north facing, chances are you won't get much to grow there because there won't be enough sunlight. So you want to make sure that you only grow stuff. Some plants might be able to grow in a north facing balcony, depending on whether the plant is a cool weather crop, whether it is a shade loving plant, etc. Now, in growing in a small space, if you're growing in a small space, you want to try to avoid growing the bushy variety of whatever plant it is that you're growing, because if you strive for the bushy variety, then you may find that they spread out a lot, and then you either going to lose your walking space, or your garden is going to become overcrowded, and you don't want that to happen. So try to grow the varieties that are not bushy. And for those plants that you're going to be growing in that small space, if there are dwarf versions of it available, then you may want to choose the dwarf version, because that is going to help you to save space. And when you save space, it means the more space you save, the more plants you can grow. So because we have a small growing space, sometimes we may be tempted grow to plant a lot of stuff, because there are so many things that you may want to grow. So you try to get as many things in there as you possibly can, but you want to avoid overcrowding your small space, or you will end up with issues such as pests and diseases. So if you're growing your in small spaces, then you want to ensure that before you actually start planting your garden, spend the time to plan the garden, know what you want to grow. So some questions that you can ask yourself is, will anyone else in the family be using the balcony for anything else other than gardening? Because that is going to determine how much space, how much of the available space you can use. And that is not only for balcony, but for a backyard garden. If the space is small, you have to think about others in the family, and will they want some of that space to use for something else. The next thing you might want to ask yourself is, what type of plants do I want to grow, and how much of each of these plants can I grow or do I want to grow? Next, you want to ask yourself, how much space does each of these plants need? Because depending on how much space the plants need, then that is going to determine how much of each plant you can grow. So that is something else that you need to keep in mind. So it can be tricky trying to figure out how you're going to use a small space. It can be really tricky because when it comes to gardening, we want to plant, and we want to plant this, we want to plant that, and there's just so much that you want to plant, but there is only so much you can plant based on the space you have. So one of the things that you're going to do when you're thinking of growing in small space is to get ideas by observing people who either have a balcony garden or they're growing in small space. You can watch videos of small space gardeners and get ideas from them. This will help you to see how you can use your space to get the most out of it. You can also talk to your neighbors, because, as the saying goes, two heads are better than one. So sometimes you will have a lot of ideas, but then you never think about doing things a particular way, and someone might suggest, okay, you can do this way. And sometimes the suggestion that they make is just what you were looking for. So in addition to watching videos and observing other people's small space garden, then you want to talk to those who have experience in that field. Hi, Han White, how are you? Yes, so spend some time and talk to your neighbors and friends, because they may have lots of suggestions that you may benefit from. Now, there are various vertical gardening products out there on the market. So you can use trellises, you can use stackable pots, you can use hanging baskets, pallet garden, rail hanging planters, etc. So you have to know, based on the space that you want, what will work best for you and work with that. Let's see. And says, I'm well. You? Okay, I'm doing okay too. Yeah, I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. I'm just a bit dreading the rest of the evening because it is minus 27 and feels like minus 37. And we don't usually get minus 27 in December. That would be like January temperatures. But last week it was warm, unusually warm. This week it is unusually cold. It is minus 27, but it actually feels like minus 37. So I am dreading the idea of going out there, and I have to. But apart from that, I am okay. Yes. So do your research into what is available for vertical gardenings, because I only mentioned a few of what is available. There are lots of different options out there. So make sure you do a thorough research, because you don't want to spend and then find that that wasn't the best option, and then you have to go and start all over again, or you might have to just satisfy with what you have. Okay, and White says that's wonderful. Okay. Now, as you grow your vertical garden, minus 30, you would freeze, Morgan. Okay. Yes. I'm already dressed in my ski pants, and I'm going to be putting on a really thick winter jacket and winter boot before I go out there. I already have my hand warmers activated and just waiting for me to. Yes, I'm going to be bundling down as if it is the peak of winter. Yeah, so when you are growing in small spaces, plants are, oh, Celsius, it is Celsius. So when you're growing in small spaces, what you're gonna find is, depending on what it is that you want to grow, a lot of people love to grow their peppers and tomatoes, and then they love to grow their herbs and their lettuces. So your plants are going to have various sizes. So as you plan how to organize your small space, you want to ensure that you place the larger plants to the north, because plants that are south facing get the most sun. So you want to place the largest plants to the north and the smaller ones. So gradually, so you put the largest, then the second size to that, and then the closest size to that, and go down until you reach the smallest plant. And the reason you want to do that is because the small plants will not block the sunlight from the large ones. And you want to ensure that all of your plants are getting enough sunlight. Now, if you have a plant that is a cool weather plant or a plant that loves the shade, then those plants you can actually place them behind your large plants, and then keep the other small plants in front of the large plant, because that will work well in providing shade for those plants that like the cool or the shade. So these are some of the things that you need to keep in mind, because it doesn't make sense to plant the garden haphazardly without planning it when you're growing in small space, even if you're growing in large space, because what you want is to maximize your growing potential. So always plan the garden ahead of time, how you're going to organize it. And I have seen vertical gardens where all it is just a piece of plank nailed to the wall, or hung against the side of the balcony railing, and then the plants are attached, the planters are attached to it. And some people who don't really have the balcony, but they have a large window and they can't put anything on the window, walls that are close to the window, they will just use a piece of plank, or they will use a very narrow shelving system and put their small containers on it. So there are various options. There are many options when it comes to having a garden. Of course, it's not the same as having a nice sized garden that you want, but having a small garden is better than not having any at all. Yes, and as time goes by, depending on your circumstances, if you have plans to move away in the future, then you can keep that into consideration as you consider getting your own property. Now, another way that you can ensure that you maximize your growing space is to prune your plants. So remember I said try not to grow the bushy variety if you're growing in small spaces. Some plants can be pruned, especially if you're growing things like your indeterminate tomatoes and peppers. They can be pruned. And even if you're growing things like tomatoes that are determinate or the bushy variety, those can be pruned too. You just want to ensure that you are not pruning off any of the stems that will produce fruits. So the leafy portions that looks like a stem, but it's not really a stem, it's just a large collection of leaves. Those you can prune off of your bushy varieties. So you have to look at the plant and see what is not really needed there. So pruning your plant is one of the ways that you're going to be maximizing your space. The good thing about growing things like indeterminate tomatoes is that the goal is to keep the main stem and to keep it growing tall as opposed to growing and spreading out. So you keep on pruning and that will help. And then another benefit to pruning is that depending on how many plants you have on your balcony or your small space and how close they are to each other, then you want to keep them pruned so that it has a good airflow through in between the plants because you know that is very important to your plants. Now, plants that are grown in small, oh, hi, growing my own. How are you? Plants that are grown in small space may get crowded, so you need to pay attention to things like pests and plant diseases. Because the space is so small, it is easy for the pest to go from one plant to the other, and the same for the disease. Now, the only fortunate thing in some cases is that pests that affect one type or one set of plants will not necessarily affect another type or another set of plants. So you may be able to escape if you have a pest issue. And the same thing goes for plant diseases. But if you notice that you have pest issue, as soon as you see that, you need to treat your plants because when you're growing in small space, it is just easy for them to transfer from one plant to the other. And then the next disadvantage of having pests when you're growing on a balcony or in a small space is that you don't really have a lot of each type of plant that you're growing, and sometimes these pests can really decimate your plant. So if you don't have a lot of each type of plant, then you may suffer a severe loss. You may even lose the entire garden. So you have to keep an eye out for pests each time you go into the garden and make sure that once you see them, you try your best to get them under control as quickly as is possible. Okay, Grandma Honey is saying hi to Han. Yes. Now, one very, very important thing to consider when it comes to growing on your balcony, and this applies to pretty much any garden you have, whether it is a large one, whether you're on an acreage, you're on a farm, or you are growing on your balcony, is aesthetics. Because your neighbors are going to see what you're growing, especially if you're growing in small spaces in your yard or on a balcony. Your surrounding neighbors are going to be looking on at what you're growing. And if you're growing on a balcony and you have guests, your guests are going to be looking at your balcony and seeing your garden. So you want to make sure that you keep your garden neat and tidy. And more important than even your guests and your neighbors looking on, if you're growing on your balcony, chances are the balcony is going to be off your living room, and that's the area where you sit and relax, and you don't want to be sitting down relaxing, and then every time you look out your balcony all you see is this eyesore of a garden. It can actually make your life miserable, and it can also prevent you from actually enjoying your balcony garden as you should. So aesthetics is very important. Yes, so try your best to keep your garden neat and clean. And some of the ways, sometimes you may arrange your garden pots or your vertical garden neatly, but then you're growing in things like different type of buckets or little reused containers and stuff like that. If you are going to do that, there's nothing wrong with it. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying if you're reusing, say, a jug that you bought some soap in or something, you can't reuse it, or your coffee containers. That's not what I'm saying. But if you're growing in a lot of containers that were not originally designed for gardening, try to keep pots that are similar, or the containers that are similar together. Try to keep them neat. Consider even the color of the containers that you're using, because if you place different colors haphazardly over the garden or the balcony, even though you may place them neatly, sometimes it might not make your garden look as neat as it actually is. So, those are some of the things that you can keep in mind. And if it is going to be a balcony garden, then you want to make sure that you know how it is. Sometimes you're watering and the dirt gets splashed onto the side of your containers and they get a bit messy. You also want to ensure that you keep that nice and tidy and neat, because you don't want to be looking at that messy state of a garden constantly, and you don't want to be embarrassed when your guests come and have to look at that. So aesthetics, especially for balcony garden or small space garden, is very, very important. So those are some of the things that you can keep in mind. So have you guys ever grown anything on a balcony, or do you grow in small spaces? And if so, what would be the biggest challenge that you face in doing so? I've never really tried growing on a balcony. I think I've only lived somewhere with a balcony for a year. And at that point in time, I was new to the country, so didn't even think about growing anything at that time. So I don't have any experience with a balcony garden. But one of the things that you need to keep in mind as you plan your balcony garden is that if you are going to be using your balcony just for a garden, so you're not going to be using it for recreational purposes and stuff like that, then you want to make sure that you arrange it so that you can move around your garden without bouncing things over. You want to make sure that you allow sufficient walking space between your plants. And not only just walking space, you need to ensure that you allow space where you can actually proper care of your plants. Because if you make your garden so crowded that you can hardly reach the some of the plants, then your plants are going to suffer, and you can become pretty frustrating, because having just a balcony garden is frustrating as it is. It can be fun, but because most of us desire to have a garden, and if you live in a region where you only have a balcony, then it can be frustrating. And as you try to make the most of it, then you want to make sure that you organize your garden in the best way that will bring you the most comfort. Let's see. And says, I grow in small space. Okay. Challenges are overcrowded, pests, not growing smaller plants. Okay. Yes, I can imagine those would definitely be a problem. And if you're there are some who they just want to grow a few herbs, or they just want to grow maybe a tomato and a few lettuces. So for them, that is okay. But as for those, especially those who like to watch gardening videos, as you watch more garden videos and you try to, and you get more ideas, and you hear of new type of plants, and you hear of these gardeners describing, oh, these produce taste, what these produce look like, and stuff like that. Sometimes you think to yourself, oh, I would like to grow that too. So it can be a bit frustrating when you're not able to, because you just don't have the space. So sometimes we end up overcrowding our gardens because we just want to get that in. But try not to overcrowd the garden, because it can lead to more problem than it actually have success. So yes, but keep the pests under control. Treat them as soon as they occur. Don't wait too long. You don't want them to spread very fast to your plants. So when you're growing in your small space garden, and do you have issues in terms of how to place your plants to get the most sunlight? Or do you have enough sunlight where you can place your plants and all of them will do pretty well? Because sometimes, depending on how the home is rotated from east to west or north to south, it can be a challenge with the garden where you place your garden. And sometimes you don't have an option as to where exactly you put your garden either. Sometimes, depending on the space you have, there is just a particular location that you can use. So, for those of you who might be considering starting a garden, you might be considering buying a different property in the future or building your own home, then as you do, some of the things that you can keep in mind is the orientation of your house, whether you're going to make sure that your windows are south facing in case you want to start seedlings indoors without using the grow light, or if you're planning to overwinter plants indoors, then you want to make sure that those windows are south facing, because that is where you're going to maximize the sunlight that you get. Of course, if you have a east or west facing window, then that can work too. But for the best potential where sunlight is concerned, then you want to make it south facing. The same thing goes for planting outdoors. So if you have an option as to where on the property you place your house, then or the where you place the front of your house, then you want to make sure that you place your house at a location where it won't interfere with the garden that you would like to have. Because if you put your house to the south, then you're blocking all of the sunlight and you're only going to have the northern regions to plant. So consider all of those things. And if you're going to have a greenhouse, you might consider keep that in mind as well. Where's the best place on the property to put it to ensure that you maximize your sunlight? Because sunlight is one of the most critical things to grow and plant apart from having the space to do so. Let's see. And says, well, for my tomatoes are at the same location for over 5 years. I can't rotate them. Everything else can be. Okay, well that's not too bad then, because it's only your tomatoes that you can't rotate. So that's not bad at all. Let's see. And says, a part of my garden never have anything growing there. Oh, sorry about that, my dear. Hi, Makira. Hey, how are you? Yeah. You said very good live. Okay, thank you, my dear. Yeah, so these are the things that you need to keep in mind as you consider getting a larger property, or if you have a small space that you intend to grow in. Let's see, Morgan says, I have a greenhouse that's supposed to be installed by the end of the month. It's 8 by 8. Oh, awesome. So is that a heated greenhouse or is it just a regular greenhouse? I would love to get my hands on a heated greenhouse. I'd be ecstatic if I had a heated greenhouse. In fact, if I ever get the opportunity in the future to go anywhere else where I have the option to build my own house or to get an acreage, I would definitely be building myself a heated greenhouse. I could grow all year round. Oh my goodness. And if I was to move somewhere else and I could not build a heated greenhouse, but I have the option of building my house, I would definitely try, if I can afford to build a room that is just a greenhouse. Only plants in there, so I'd make sure that I have nice large windows and make sure that I have them south facing so I can get the most out of them. But oh yeah, I would enjoy having a heated greenhouse. Unfortunately for us here, greenhouse does work to some extent, the unheated greenhouse, but there is not much, you don't really get much out of it. Okay, you still have to customize it. Okay. Yeah, but we don't really get much out of a greenhouse here. I think maybe you might get a few weeks extension, so you might be able to start your plants um, in the greenhouse earlier, and you might be able to keep plants, move plants to your greenhouse at the close to the end of the growing season. But you don't really get much of an extension from having a greenhouse here if it's not heated, because once it starts to get cold, it's just either it is extremely cold or it is extremely hot, but there is not really much benefit. Well, there is benefit because any extension is worth it. Sometimes your plant just need 2 weeks extension, and sometimes all you need is just 2 weeks to get plants started a little bit earlier. But yes, it is definitely, you don't really get a lot out of it if your greenhouse is not heated here. But still worth it, because 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks before growing, or a few weeks after the growing season, then it would still be worth it to have a greenhouse. The only unfortunate thing is that in my region, there is restriction on how many buildings you can have on your property, and so I'm not able to build myself a greenhouse. Yes, unfortunately, but I guess that's just life. We just have to make the most of what we have, whether it is a small balcony or a small growing space or it's a large growing space. Whatever it is, we just have to make the most out of it. Well, thank you, Makiahe. Yeah, so if there are no more comments, I'm going to be saying goodbye to you guys shortly and go get ready for work. Not looking forward to being out there in that cold. Well, at least I'm not working outdoors. That's a good thing, but still have to get to the vehicle. Uh, Someone hear me, they would think I have to go far to go to the vehicle and it's just right outside the door. But cold is cold. I hate the cold. I would do anything not to be living in this cold. Yes, I hope the information that was presented today was or is good enough that it will be able to help someone who may have a small growing space or balcony to grow on. And For those of you who are here now who weren't here on Friday, I should let you know that I will not be having that worm farming Q&A live on Friday because I'm not going to be around. I'm going to have a video. I will try to make a long video for you guys, informative video, of course, as that would be the purpose of the live. So try to have a long informative video that you guys can watch during the time that I would be doing the live. Of course, it will be shorter than the normal time that my live would last. So I hope to see you guys again on Monday. So I hope you stay safe and that you will enjoy the rest of your week.